it's really good to see a bunch of friends and look forward to spending the next 2-3 days, whatever it is, together. But I had the chance to run into this guy earlier this year, and to me, it's amazing what the sport has done under his leadership. I've had to, elevate in some small way, plays a very, very small part in supporting the sport and the teams and the drivers. But it was cool because I got to go down to LA and see you do something that was unique, right? I mean, racing inside the Coliseum, the Clash, and so here we sit at the end of it. I kind of want to take you back to the beginning. Tell me about the event. Tell me about the season and what you learned from it.
Well, I think it's a pleasure to be here again. Lots of friendly faces and some faces that are not as friendly. I'm just kidding. Our season has been, I think, extraordinary. The Clash at the Coliseum was unbelievable. We took control of the Coliseum 6 weeks before the event, and we essentially created a track in there. And we were finished by January 15th. We had 2 weeks to cure the track, and then it was extraordinary. We weren't sure how it was going to go. The nice folks at iRacing were good enough to have a simulation for us, and then we had some iRacers that professionally that gave us some idea of what to expect. But it's the only NASCAR race I've ever been at where everyone was smiling. No one was unhappy. The setting was extraordinary. And it was a proof of concept for us as well, right? So not only, our partners at Fox were phenomenal. 6 hours on Big Fox to start off our season. It was like an infomercial for NASCAR in a place where that people didn't expect us to be. And I think it actually is kind of emblematic of where we are as a sport, which is we do things that people don't expect us to do. Whether it's racing at the LA Coliseum, running at our first ever street course in our 75-year history. Next year is the 75th anniversary of NASCAR. At Chicago, on Lake Michigan, around Buckingham Fountain, on Michigan Avenue. It's just something that people don't expect from us, and that's really what we want. Whether it's, again, bold and innovative, doing things in social justice in 2020 that took people by surprise. Banning the Confederate flag took people by surprise. So it's really a theme that my team really works around, which is we have to make sure that our partners, everyone understands that we are not going to be the NASCAR that we were 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And fortunately for us, it's working. So the Clash of the Coliseum was fantastic. Just this season.
On that one, so we were talking backstage, and obviously your background in the NFL, if you think about, and we'll get to media in a second, which I know one's going to ask you about. But
really?
But the need to take your business live to new markets. And then I remember being at the Clash and talking to you and your team, and I don't want to give away the stat, but it was staggering to me.
Yeah.
The amount of people who had never been to a NASCAR race that were in that building. How many was it?
Thank you for the tee-up.
I appreciate it.
70% had never been to a single NASCAR race. And that's what our expectation is going to be, the Chicago Street Course. But that's exactly what we're trying to do. Chicago Street Course, the numbers are going to be very similar. At least that's what our expectations are.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm thrilled. I mean, and I won't get into the numbers, but we'll call them investments as opposed to losses. It's expensive, right? But it is worth it because it actually is showing your partners that you are willing to invest in the sport to make it grow. It's a lot easier, frankly, just to race 2 races at a racetrack a year. Just the margins are better and you're able to spread costs against 2 events versus 1. But it's not what the sport needs. I'm not suggesting we're not going to race at some tracks twice. We're going to, right? I mean, do our fans want to see us run twice at Talladega and In Daytona, yeah, they do. They want us to run twice at Bristol. They do.
Well, I think it's fascinating because like if you're not into motorsports or you haven't been to NASCAR, like our insights team at Elevate does a lot of this work and studies not just pricing but product packaging, and we've done some work for Steve and his team. And it's fascinating as the minute they get a fan, they stay. And it's probably the same for all of us if you're in a sport, right? And the hurdle at times becomes, it's just so big. You know, how do you even think about going to an event and knowing that they were there and then talking to your media partners as I got ready for tomorrow? You know, there's the media world around, you want to be there, you want the eyeballs, but then you need new fans, you need to attract new fans. Sure. And then that leads you to Chicago. So as you get into Chicago, like what is the thought process? Why Chicago? How did it come to light, et cetera?
You know, I think it came to light out of the work, hard work, frankly, of a lot of people on our team, but I would say one person in particular was Ben Kennedy, working with Kara Buckman from the Chicago Sports Commission. And the two of them decided that this was going to be a phenomenal thing for the city of Chicago and a phenomenal thing for NASCAR. And we worked really hard to convince the city of Chicago that they should host a race. And I will say this, Mayor Lightfoot was phenomenal. She believed in it early and often, and that helped for sure. You know, the city of Chicago's complicated. You know, if the mayor says one thing, there are others that say something else, and that's just how those things go. So,
how many do we anticipate over the course of the weekend?
I think we're gonna have I'd say 100,000 or more, and it's hard. You know, what is the definition of when someone is in and when someone's not? But it's going to be interesting. We're going to do some things at the Coliseum this coming year and at Chicago Street Course that will have a little bit of noise reduction. And you know, noise is such a huge part of what NASCAR is all about and part of the DNA. But taking the decibels down a little bit is probably going to be important for us to do. So it just doesn't echo throughout the off the buildings and that back onto the race fans. But I think. For us, I think, and for NBC is thrilled, obviously. We've got some friends here from Fox and some friends from NBC will be here tomorrow as well. A lot of the innovation that we are doing happened to seem to fall within the Fox portion of this season, not as much on the NBC portion, so it was great. NBC is a great partner, and so is Fox, so it was great to have something in that part of the season. And I think schedule innovation for us has proven to be successful. So these new events we're selling out. These new events we're, creating new fans that are coming, and that's exactly what we need to do. We need to continue to challenge the brand, challenge the sport to be better, and think differently about where our future is going to be.
And on the sport, I think when I heard you explain this to me in New York, around the next-gen car, there's a lot of discussions around tech in sports, right? Sure. No matter what sport you're in, and what does that mean to the athlete. There's discussions for you, certainly, around what it means to cost. There's discussions in other sports around what it means to parity, right? In my parent league, the NFL, we have supposedly a hard cap, although I don't know if the Rams are in this room. We can discuss whether it's hard or not. Jen, I see you.
Well, it didn't matter.
In your world, I mean, did you think that we had a fun moment in NASCAR, like where the next-gen car decided to run against the wall and create a viral video for everyone? So I guess talk about the car, and then actually, I think for this crew, how it changed your sport from a manufacturing perspective, cost, parity, all the way around.
Well, let's start with the fun thing. So how many saw the video of Ross Chastain doing what was insane? For those of you who have not seen it, it's not a plug, I'm not trying to convert people into NASCAR fans here, as far as you know, but it is.
I'm calling bullshit right there.
Whatever. But it's so, watching it live, it's like something I'd never ever seen. Someone described it to me today as the single best sporting event or event in sports that wasn't a winner. So he didn't win the race, but he needed, going into the last lap, he was 2 points to the bad to make it to the championship for this weekend in Phoenix. 2 points to the bad, which means he needed to pass 2 people, or Denny Hamlin needed to lose 2 positions, right? And so this lunatic decides going into turn 3, because it's a half-mile track, and so the corners are very sharp. And so you have to get down to like 70 miles per hour in order to make the corner. But if you run the outside wall and just ruin your car all the way around the wall, you can go 135 miles per hour, which is exactly what he did. And it was the most epic moment in NASCAR history. I really believe that.
I think it's the most viewed, right?
Yeah, it was over 100 million views. So those of you who didn't, go add to the numbers, please, by going to take a peek at it. But to get back to the question on the car itself, I think that people don't realize, who are not in the sport, and frankly, even those that are in the sport, what an absolute gamble the car was. So if you think about the old car, right? The old car essentially was manufactured by 5 race teams. 1 Toyota team, Gibbs, 2 Chevy teams, Hedrick Motorsports and Richard Childress Racing, and then 2 Ford teams, Penske and Stewart-Haas Racing. The only way you could race in NASCAR, if you wanted to come in new, or you were not one of those 5 teams, you had to have an affiliation with those teams. They literally are the ones that were manufacturing the vehicles. So we decided that we were going to, with the team's blessing, because that's what the teams wanted to do, because it was going to help in cost control and help new owners come into the sport, is to allow, or is to go out and essentially 24 RFPs for 47 pieces and parts to the car. And so theoretically, oversimplification, if any of you are mechanically inclined, which I'm not, you can buy the parts, assemble the car, and go racing. Now, it's not that simple, but essentially that's what it is. Now, the problem is think about supply chain issues and other issues that are just, were pervasive last year and into this year, and inflate all of it, right? The thing that kept me up a year ago was, could we get that race car on the racetrack? I didn't, at the Clash, I didn't know whether that was feasible. And our guys worked incredibly hard in order to make that happen. Yeah. Now, if you think about it, all right, you get to January and you don't have chassis, you don't have wheels, you don't have tire, whatever it's going to be, right? Because the entire car was new, all of it. What are you going to do? You don't have a car to race. Literally do not have a car to race. And that's what a gamble this was. And so I think the results of the car have been, on the competition side, have been, I think, nothing short of extraordinary. We have 19 winners this year, which is a record. 5 first-time winners, which is a record. More green flag passes than we've ever had since we've been doing, taking the stats on passes throughout the field. More passes at the start-finish line. I mean, it's just the car has delivered. Yeah. And, if we're going to be completely honest, the car is also, drivers got very vocal, and as they should, frankly, about the safety of the car. So the car was designed in order to make sure you didn't have catastrophic injuries. So the car was designed to be very stiff. So, again, if you think about Ryan Newman's crash at the Daytona 500 in 2020, he had what was called an intrusion into the car, right? And so we wanted to stiffen up and strengthen the car so there wouldn't be an intrusion into the vehicle that would then get to the driver, him or herself. And that's what it did. So the rear of the car, because its styling is a little bit shorter, and the rear of the car is stiffer, and so it doesn't have as much crush. And so when you do is you hit the rear and it doesn't crush, the energy needs to go somewhere, and the energy was going to the driver. So it looked to be hits that were not that bad. The drivers were, taking bigger blows to their body. And so we have We have changed that, and so made design changes to the car. So next year when they go back to the Clash, it'll be a different thing. But the car itself, the economic model and what it means. So you take Justin Marks, who owns Trackhouse Racing with Pitbull. The crazy driver, Ross Chastain, that's one of his drivers. The other is Daniel Suarez. He got into this sport because he knew the next-gen car was coming. Denny Hamlin and Michael Jordan got into this sport because the next-gen car was coming. We had 8 charter transfers last year because of the car. And so the car is, listen, it's not perfect, but the safety things are the biggest concern for me personally, but we're solving for those, which is going to be fantastic. But what is going to happen from an expense standpoint moving forward, this is the first step in trying to create a bit of a different economic model for the race teams.
I mean, look, it's amazing. It's a big gamble. Right now, obviously, it paid off, and I think the parity is fascinating. I mean, I certainly see it in the NFL, the league you worked in, what that means to viewership, knowing that you have a chance. So, shifting gears, I mean, it's the topic of the day, right? Your media rights are out there. Your partners are in the room. I talked to them. Obviously, they're thrilled. There's all this now shoulder programming that didn't exist in and around NASCAR. So how do you think about where you are today and where do you want to be?
Well, I think, listen, we're bullish on where we are today as we head into our media rights negotiation with our incumbents. But I think if you think about where we were versus where we are today, we were very purposeful about really putting a plan together and then executing against that plan. And the plan really was schedule variation, making sure our media partners were sold out with CPM increases, need to make sure that our viewership was steady. And over the last 2 years, our share is up 25%, 14% last year, 11% thus far this year. Since 2018, we are, if not the most stable property, I think we're probably second, very close to where the NFL is from a viewership stabilization standpoint. That was important, right? And I think you combine that with the last thing, which was not part of the plan, which was relevance, right? How were you going to be relevant? And for us, it was important to try to get younger and more diverse. So that was a stated goal for 12 years. We need to get younger and more diverse. It's hard to do, right? Every brand out there wants to get younger and more diverse. Every brand. And it's like, well, you can say it, but how are you going to do it? So we were very fortunate in 2020 to have 2 things happen. I'm not going to say COVID was a good thing for our sport. It was and it wasn't. Crushed us on the bottom line, but people started to think differently about NASCAR in a post-COVID world, right? Or in a COVID world. And I think the first was we stopped competing on March 13th. And then we were unsure what was going to happen. And our thought process at the time, and I got my senior team together on that Monday following the Friday that we had closed and said, I believe this is an opportunity to steal share from other sports and entertainment properties, which is what we've done. We are the first major sport back to competing on May 18th in Darlington, South Carolina. We were shut down for 71 days. We were the first sport back to competing in front of fans that we did in mid-June. Those were daunting, right? I was nice enough to get calls from lots of different sports properties and leaders in sports, and they said, you know what, we're pulling for you. And for the first time, I believed them. They were actually... We were. And that was important, right? And it was a burden. I was nervous that going to Darlington in front of no one. And honestly, I was emotional during the national anthem when it was crazy. And then when the green flag happened, it was crazy. It just was a very emotional time. And I was out in the grandstands, because I was not essential personnel, clearly. But it was, that was great. But it was really the events of June 2020 that has defined the brand and where we are, that has made it different for us, which is...
Talk about it.
The stance on social justice was so surprising to people, right? So what we did in Atlanta, really with the driver's help, and the driver that really led that charge was Jimmy Johnson. And he created a video or we helped him create a video with the other drivers, talking about the importance of learning and doing better and listening, which was so important to be able to do that. He gave the sport permission to be able to do it, he and the other drivers, because they are the voice, right? And I read a prepared speech, sounded like a Lou Gehrig moment with over the loudspeaker that Fox picked up, and Jeff Gordon did a nice forward on it as well. And it was surprising, and it was important. And then we followed that with the banning of the Confederate flag, and then the stances and then obviously what happened with Bubba at Talladega. But it's the efforts since then about not just talking about our efforts in diversity, equity, inclusion, but actually what we've done. And that part is the surprising piece. And I think the thing that I joke about this, but people say, well, if NASCAR can do it, can't anyone? Yeah, I'm not really sure how to feel about that, because it's, but I think that's important. And I do think that the relationships that we've been able to forge, and the support that we've been able to engender both in our own ranks, as we've changed the face of our employee ranks, changed the face of our ownership with Michael Jordan and Pitbull and others coming into the sport, and importantly, changing like the KPIs. You look at what the metrics are happening, we are getting younger and more diverse now. And I think that the key and I know people were like, well, that must have been courageous to ban the Confederate flag. I think for me and for my management team, I think it was really, and when that happened, I went around the room and I asked them, no groupthink, you need to say that you think this is a good idea for our sport, for the growth of our sport. And I think there were 11 of us in the room, and 11 out of 11. And I said, well, you just signed up for a shitstorm.
Yep.
Is what you did.
Yep.
But it was an important, that 2.5, 3 week period, I think there's next to the founding of NASCAR, I think were the 3 most important weeks that the sport's ever had.
Well, I think I speak for all of us in here. You did the right thing even when it was hard. And certainly in your shoes, it was not an easy place to be. And I know you had a ton of support, which makes it a little bit easier. But so talk to, I think you got next-gen car, you got good driver stories, you got parity, which I think the interesting part between an NFL and a NASCAR is we have some of the same challenges around drivers. They sit behind a car. In NFL, they sit underneath a helmet. Now you got your broadcast partners telling those stories. You've been, whether it's on Scott's podcast when he's in some hotel room watching hockey with Evan, but you've been very clear that your negotiations, as you think through this, may be different than some of the others, given the dynamics of how your sport works and sponsorships and team racing. So how do you think, is it different? How do you think
I think it's different, and I'm not going to play to the crowd that are here from our sponsor. Linear television is an important part. Linear television for sure, but distribution is important for us, right? If you think about the role that sponsorship plays in our sport, we'll just call them eyeballs. So we need to make sure that our future media relationships with our existing partners or others, we need to have that distribution. Team sponsorship is, depending on who you would talk to, is somewhere between 20 to 80%, depending on the race team and how that works. At least today, right? Could change in the future, but sponsorship is important for race teams, and the race teams look at sponsorship in really two ways. One is, traditionally a kind of a B2C relationship, which is really eyeball driven, and the other is B2B, which is becoming increasingly important for race teams. But visibility itself and having someone understand that is their race car, that is their brand, is an important thing.
Yeah, and even in North America, it's changed dramatically, right? Because for a long time, you would argue NASCAR might have been the only place you can put it on a jersey,
Sure.
right? Now
Now
you
it's
can put
not.
it on an NBA jersey.
No, I agree.
You can put it on an MLB jersey. You can put it on a helmet. You can put it on whatever. So now you have all these positions, not just in your sport, but in all sports, right?
So I agree, and I do. Then you contrast that with, and again, it really comes down to distribution. If you think about, what Marie has done, the folks at Amazon on Thursday Night Football, it's a decade younger, tends to be more female. I mean, those are important things for brands, right? Just talked about being younger and more diverse. Well, that's happening for the NFL in that Thursday Night Football arena, right? And so young people are not watching as much television. We all know that. And so we need to make sure that we're also giving that consumer, we have to meet that consumer where they are in everything that we do, whether it's esports or it's sports betting or it's live broadcast or it's the distribution of content, ancillary program, whatever that might be, meeting them where they are is critical. I mean, what Tim Clark and our folks do on our digital side, I saw Tim walk in late there, so I just wanted to give him a shout out.
Call him out.
We're having our best digital year since we've had since 2005. And that tends to be younger. Social tends to be younger. We have to meet that consumer where they're going to be.
Yep.
And so all we're asking for from that Gen Z consumer or any of them, frankly, is just to try us. And so for the first time in decades, we have young people who believe our brand is an authentic brand, and they're kicking the tires, right? They are saying, "I'll give you a shot because I think you're authentic," and that is it's all you can ask for, frankly, as any brand, but certainly as a sports brand that's 75 years old.
Yeah, and I think it's you've seen tremendous growth, and now you get to what every league deals with or what every sport deals with, and you've been open about this and how you negotiate with your drivers, how you negotiate with the teams, and I think it's interesting. At times I find myself reading headlines and I'm like, well, this is no different than an NFL CBA. There's a media rights deal coming up. There's a discussion around distributions.
Sure.
There's how teams work. What do we spend? I mean, in your mind, obviously there's been tremendous growth, right? You've made it easier to get into the sport in some degree, right? There's more parity. You can win now. And with all that success, now comes the next part of those negotiations.
Sure. Yeah.
So how do you think through those pieces?
Yeah, so and again, not to try to get in, kind of inside NASCAR, if you will, but we have something called our charter system. Mm-hmm. Think of it as franchise light. When you buy a charter in NASCAR, which we've only had for 7 years, you are essentially buying three things. You're buying a guaranteed spot in the race. You're buying two pieces of revenue, one that's fixed and one that's variable, right, where you finish on the racetrack. And then you've bought some governance, right, to try to help NASCAR think through what we're going to do on a competition side. That's what we've bought. That's what they've bought. And so the charters were 9-year deals, so that coincided with our media rights agreements. And so our media rights at the end of 2024, our charters end at the end of 2024. So we are in discussions with our race teams about what our future is going to look like. If I had to guess, I would say that it looks like, incremental revenue for our race teams. It looks like some type of expense. I don't want to call it a cap, but some type of limitation on expenses. What that looks like, could be a floor, soft cap, luxury tax, hard cap, something that allows the teams to, frankly, not spend money that they don't have to spend to go fast. That will also help with parity. It also helps with the, with the charter values themselves. The enterprise value of the charters has increased by a significant multiple, which I won't get into today, in the last 3 years. I mean, it's extraordinary what they're trading at today, and what is that going to look like in a new charter agreement. I think they're just going to continue to soar, frankly, and that's a good thing. So right now, we're not going to negotiate in the media about what's going on there, but we'll find a place where all stakeholders are going to be in a good place, and that it's fair for all stakeholders.
Yeah. How do you, if I give you the freedom to dream, so Chicago happens, Clash happens, what else happens? And maybe on the calendar or markets. I know I don't want you to make a headline tonight and say a market's going to get one or not, but it seems to me you want to take this sport to new markets, introduce it to new fans. So
we do. I wouldn't be surprised.
How often, how much?
I wouldn't be surprised in the foreseeable future. Obviously, we've announced our schedule for, well, not obviously to all of you, but we have announced our schedule for next year, and we have some new things on the calendar for next year, including the Chicago Street Course All-Stars, going back to a facility that's kind of a throwback and a nod to our long-term fans, going back to a place called North Wilkesboro. But I think expansion is going to continue, both within the states and I think internationally as well. When that is, I don't know. But we're also looking at an electric vehicle exhibition series. We're looking at a sustainable fuel. We're measuring a carbon footprint to try to get to carbon neutrality at some point. All those things are important pillars for where the sport is going. And if I would say again, I think it's bold and innovative and unexpected. At some point, it won't be unexpected for the brand, but for right now, it's going to continue to do that, and that's what we're going to do.
I love it. All right, we have a minute left. Questions?
Just yell it out.
Just yell it out. We can hear you. What's up, man? What's up, man?
So I'm with my second brand now as an official partner with NASCAR, so good to see you, Steve. Question for both of you. With what you're at liberty to talk about, you probably, Steve, get tired of hearing about F1 and everything they've done in North America over the past couple of years. But one specific piece that I'm curious about from a brand perspective is what McLaren has announced with creating a new digital asset on a specific car that rotates. Can you speak to a little bit, and let me back up, also what the NHL has done recently with the superimposed logos that move in broadcast. Being that you're in negotiations right now for the next iteration of media rights with NASCAR, what you're at liberty to talk about. I know you're probably not allowed to talk about a lot of the technology. They're both probably have some ideas, each on their own, but just innovation from a brand perspective, outside of static, moving the numbers forward, which is great, by the way. What does that look like? And then Al, over to you afterwards, without putting you on the spot 100%, but if you were to consult on stage here today, and kind of in a wrap, and were to give some, off-the-cuff advice to NASCAR on what they should focus on, taking an assumption that maybe they're not yet, what would that consultancy?
So I'll start on the first piece. So nothing to announce, so not to disappoint, but I do think that, if you take a look at, for the first time ever, we have in-car cameras in every single car, which allowed us to have some really cool camera angles when Ross was doing his, I think they call it the Hail Melon, because he's a watermelon farmer. But I do think there are things that we are doing from a digital side and a technology side. There's so much data that spins off the car. So how we are using that, how we are packaging that then allows for our television partners, or what we're doing on our own and operated digital and social channels, it's limitless, and we're going to continue to push the envelope on that. So again, nothing to announce today, but I do think it's incredibly fertile ground, and anything that draws the consumer closer, both in a live situation or something that's happening afterwards, is going to be important for us.
Yeah, I think the first part of your question, we had the privilege to work with the National Hockey League on the digitally enhanced dashboards and what the value of those look like. And I think you've seen it in MLB for a while with behind home plate rotational and to me, you're going to see more of that around, give the EPL credit. They can take their rights and marks wherever. I think in the NFL, it was 75-mile radius outside your stadium. Now that's changed with international home markets. And so I think the expansion of partnerships or sponsorships as it relates to teams and leagues will continue. The question is how, when, where. I think NFL teams have always pushed for more media visible signage inside of our games and what that might look like. I think the NFL would push back because they want to take all those rights. As far as advice for NASCAR, I don't know. My sense is they're doing a really good job attracting new fans. And Chicago, Clash, I was with a bunch of people at the Clash who had never been to a NASCAR race, and they were immediately hooked. And I do think it's one of those sports. When I was growing up, I wasn't a big hockey fan, but I went to a hockey game, I was immediately hooked. And so I think NASCAR has that same feeling to it. And once you get there and you see the pomp and circumstance, the party, the noise is fun to me, so I'm interested in the whole E thing. But the more new fans that can be introduced to that sport and those drivers and those venues, the better off they'll be.
So Steve, you talked a lot about new markets, demographics, looking at spaces like LA and Chicago, which are fundamentally different. And when you look at these new demographics, you think about people that are focused on experiences and premium, especially in those markets. NASCAR hasn't made that a primary focus for a while. So how are you thinking about that on a go-forward basis?
No, that's a good question. I think Chicago will look different than anything we've ever done because essentially you're bringing in all that temporary structure, right? So you're going to build a racetrack. Safer barriers, all of it, that's just the racetrack component of it. But then what's going to happen from a hospitality standpoint will look significantly different. I do think for us, we've been able to elevate the fan experience to some degree. We need to continue to do that and double down on that with investments. I mean, we're very fortunate that our consumer ticket numbers this year were up over 20%. We're a little bit light still on corporate a little bit as people are finding their way back, but we've had an extraordinary year from an attendance standpoint. But ultimately, how you create that kind of carnival atmosphere while you're at the racetrack. We do camping better than anyone. There'll be 10,000 campers at Phoenix this weekend. It's a sea of camping, which is really cool. But we need to have that elevated experience at every NASCAR race, frankly. And we've got much work to do there, frankly. And I think, but it's, we understand the task at hand. We hired a new director of, managing director of our event experience to work at our own facilities, our own racetracks, and then also work with Speedway Motorsports and the independents, because there needs to be a base level of what it means to have a NASCAR event at your racetrack, either from a capital expenditure standpoint in terms of making sure the facility looks the way it should look, or other just cool things that are happening on a race weekend. So we've elevated that. We need to continue to be better and better.
I think before Scott says, one, thank you, and I'd be remiss if Scott, not you, but your actual staff, the entire team at Sportico, thank you so much for putting this on. We wouldn't be here without you and your event, but it's a true honor. So go ahead, buddy, whatever you're going to say.
No, I'm just trying to still shake. Does anybody else have a little bit of a little tingle with that phrase of intrusion into the car? I'm like, oh, that just sounds awful.
No, it was awful.
Yeah, that's just intrusion into the car. It's the nicest possible way you could actually describe what is actually happening. But folks, seriously, thank you for joining us. What we're trying to do at Sportico is create a thought leadership platform. We thought that there was a big white space in the industry for that, and to have people like Steve and Al regale us with what you see, what you've done, how you think you can help each other, how you can help the industry, and what little role Sportico can play. And by the way, you did say Penske. Thank you very much. We are a little partial to Penske and Sportico, so thanks for that. But really, thank you all. We're only in the quarter turn here of what we plan on doing tonight and tomorrow, so hopefully you can join us at the W later and at the track tomorrow and back here tomorrow for some more panels. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.